All right, so it sounds like you're looking into eviction hardship extensions in California. And maybe you're in a tough spot and really need to understand how this legal tool works and you need to know fast. Well, that's exactly what this deep dive is for. We're going to be uncovering what a hardship extension really is, who qualifies, and how you go about requesting one. And to help us really break all of this down, we have an expert in California eviction law with us today. What really jumps out to you about this topic?
I think what's really interesting about this is it's this balance between the right of a landlord to their property, but also a tenant's need for housing, especially when they're facing some sort of hardship. And California law tries to really navigate this, and it offers some temporary protection to those tenants who are facing those difficulties. But it's really important for those tenants to know how all of this works and all the ins and outs.
Okay, so let's just cut to the chase. What is an eviction hardship extension, and what does it actually do?
Yeah, so it's kind of like hitting the pause button on the eviction process. It gives you a little bit of breathing room when things happen that make it impossible to just leave your house right away. Now, it's important to note that this doesn't erase any rent that you owe, but it does buy you some really valuable time.
So time for what exactly? What can someone actually get done during this pause?
Well, you can think of it as a chance to really tackle the root cause of whatever is putting you at risk of eviction. So let's say it's job loss. You can use that time to really ramp up your job search and find something new. Or if it's a medical emergency, you can focus on getting yourself back on your feet and looking at options for financial help.
So it's not about avoiding rent altogether. It's more about addressing the hardship that's preventing you from paying rent in the first place. Now, I imagine qualifying for this extension, it's not automatic. So what kind of situations make someone eligible for this type of protection?
That's right. It's not just a free pass. Courts are looking for situations that are temporary and that are outside of your control. So things like a sudden job loss, serious illness, natural disaster, things like that would make it very difficult to pay your rent or find a new place to live.
And what about misconceptions? What are some things that people think would qualify for this but actually don't?
Yeah, a big one is that any financial difficulty will automatically qualify you. But the hardship has to be something pretty severe, and it has to be linked to your ability to stay housed. So, for example, if you're just overspending or you chose to pay other bills instead of rent, it's probably not going to meet the requirements.
Okay, so let's say that you're facing one of those qualifying hardships. What are the first steps towards requesting this extension?
Documentation is key. It's like building a case that you can present to the court. And usually that includes proof of income loss, financial statements, medical records, anything like that that can prove your hardship and how it's impacting your housing.
So you're gathering all this evidence. Then what makes a hardship letter really stand out to a court? Any tips for making it as impactful as possible?
Yeah, so a good hardship letter, it's going to tell a clear and concise story. You don't want to just list your problems. It should really explain the specific events that led up to the hardship, what steps you're taking to fix it, and a clear timeline for how you're going to get back on track.
So you're showing that it's serious and you're showing that you're going to be proactive about fixing it. So does all of this go directly to the court? Or are there other things that you have to do?
So filing that motion with the court is usually the last step. But there's a lot that happens before that. And it's important to know the specific rules in your county, because what qualifies in one place might not in another place.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach. You got to know what applies in your local area.
Exactly. And sometimes local ordinances or even a judge's discretion can play a role in whether or not you get the extension. And, don't forget about the human element. A good letter will also highlight how the eviction would affect your family or your job search, your health, all of that.
So putting a face to the hardship, reminding the court that this is about a real person. So let's say the court does grant this extension. What happens then? Is it just a waiting game?
Definitely not. This is where the strategy really comes in. You don't want to just stall the eviction. You really want to use that time to address whatever's causing the problem in the first place.
Okay, so you're turning this stressful situation into an opportunity to really get back on track. What are some of those key steps that someone can take during this time to really make the most of it?
So if job loss is the issue, use this time to really push forward on that job search. You can network, you can really polish up that resume, look for maybe some temporary income options, anything that's going to show that you're taking real steps to get back on your feet financially.
So showing the court and showing your landlord that you're serious about this. What about those financial assistance programs that we were talking about earlier? How can someone navigate those effectively?
Well, the key is to be persistent. Don't just apply for one program and sit back and wait. Really look around. See what local and national rental assistance programs are out there. Contact nonprofits, see if there are any government assistance options. You might be surprised at how many resources there really are if you look hard enough.
It's about taking charge, being resourceful.
Yeah.
While you're handling the financial side of things, you've also got to keep that communication open with your landlord, right?
Oh, absolutely. Transparency is really key. Let your landlord know how it's all going. Keep them updated on your job search, your applications for assistance. Are you looking at new housing? All of that. It just shows good faith that you're trying to work with them to figure this out.
So instead of being against each other, you're working together.
Yeah.
The sources mentioned that it's possible to negotiate with your landlord during this time. What kind of agreements can actually be reached?
A lot of people are surprised at how flexible this can be. So repayment plans are pretty common. You can catch up on that missed rent in installments. Maybe you can negotiate a temporary rent reduction until your finances are stable again.
So you don't have to stick to this impossible payment schedule. You can make something that works for you right now. What other options are there?
Well, some tenants negotiate to change their lease, maybe a shorter lease term if they're planning on moving, or adjusting the payment schedule so it matches up better with when they get paid. The key is to just come to the table with an open mind and see what creative solutions you can come up with together.
So even though this is a stressful time, it could actually make the relationship between you and your landlord better. One solution that I thought was interesting was a work exchange for rent credit. How does that usually work?
Yeah, so that's not as common, but it can be a win-win for everybody if it's the right situation. So let's say you've got some skills that could help out around the property. Maybe you're good with repairs or landscaping. You could offer to do that kind of work to reduce some of the rent that you owe.
That's great. You can use your skills, help out, and it takes some of the pressure off financially.
Yeah.
But what if, even after all of this, after you've tried your best to negotiate, things with your landlord fall apart? You just can't agree. What happens then?
That's when you might want to think about mediation. Having that neutral third party there can help you talk it out. And hopefully they can kind of bridge the gap between you and your landlord.
So it's like a referee to make sure everything's fair.
Mhm.
Where would someone find a mediator for this type of situation?
A lot of courts offer mediation as part of the eviction process. But you can also get in touch with some of those housing advocacy groups or legal aid societies. They usually have lists of mediators who are experienced in these kinds of disputes.
Having that neutral person there can really help calm things down and help everyone work together. Okay, so we talked about documentation being super important at the beginning. What about during this hardship stay? How does documentation play a role there?
Documentation is going to be your friend through this whole process. You want to keep track of everything. Communication with your landlord, what you're doing to find a job, applications for assistance, anything and everything that relates to the hardship and how you're trying to fix it. Having all of that written down protects you, and it helps you if any disagreements come up later.
So emails, letters, phone calls, even texts, you want to make sure you have a record of it all.
Exactly. And while you're keeping track of all of that, it's a good time to really understand your rights as a tenant in California.
Knowledge is power, right? Especially in a situation like this.
Yeah.
What resources would you recommend for tenants who want to learn more?
Well, the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing is a great place to start. They've got tons of information about tenant rights, the laws, all of that. And you can always check out those local housing advocacy groups or legal aid societies, too. They can give you advice, support, even legal representation if you need it.
So know your rights, keep track of everything, and don't be afraid to ask for help. Before we move on to the last part of our conversation, I want to talk about resilience for a minute. What does that look like in the context of dealing with an eviction?
I think in this case, it's about more than just bouncing back. It's about taking this experience and really building a more secure future. Maybe looking at your financial habits, making sure you have different sources of income, and finding people you can rely on when things are tough.
So you're not alone, and there are people and resources out there to help. Sometimes being resilient means asking for professional help, like financial counseling, legal aid, even mental health services. Sometimes you have to address what's happening underneath to get that stability.
Absolutely. It takes strength to recognize your limits and reach out for help. As we finish up, just remember that a stable home is the foundation for a good life.
It's that place where you can feel safe, secure, and you can go after your goals. That path might be hard, but it's worth it. We'll be right back to talk about some long-term strategies to prevent evictions and build a better future. Stay tuned. Okay, so welcome back to our deep dive on eviction hardship extensions. We've talked about what they are, who qualifies, and how to handle that time when your eviction is on hold. But now I want to zoom out a little bit and talk about the bigger picture. What can people do to make sure they don't end up in this situation again?
It's about creating some stability for yourself, both with your finances and with your landlord. And honestly, one of the best places to start is by making a budget that you can actually stick to. It sounds simple, but you'd be surprised how many people don't have a good handle on their money.
So take control of your finances, make some smart choices about where your money's going. What are some of those budgeting mistakes that people make that lead to problems with housing?
A big one is underestimating your expenses, or being a little too optimistic about how much money you're bringing in. So really track your spending, be realistic about it, and make sure you're factoring in those unexpected costs that pop up. And sometimes it means making some tough choices, like making sure you're paying rent before you buy other things that you might want but don't really need.
Rent has to come first. Without a stable place to live, everything else gets so much harder. The sources also talk about having an emergency fund. How can someone build up those savings when they're already having trouble just making ends meet?
You have to kind of flip your thinking around. It's not, I can't afford to save. It's, I can't afford not to save. Even if it's just a little bit every month, it's going to add up over time. Think of it as insurance for when those unexpected things in life happen that throw your budget off.
It's a safety net to catch you when you fall. We've covered the financial side, but the sources also say that talking to your landlord is important. How can that help prevent evictions?
If you have that open and honest communication with your landlord, it can make the relationship so much stronger. If you're having a hard time paying rent, don't wait until you're behind. Talk to your landlord, tell them what's going on, and see if you can figure out a solution together.
You're on the same team, not against each other. And sometimes just that open communication can make all the difference. The sources also talk about knowing your lease agreement. Why is that so important when it comes to preventing evictions?
Well, your lease is a contract. It's legally binding, and it spells out your rights and what you're responsible for as a tenant. When you know your rights, you can stand up for yourself and make sure your landlord is treating you fairly. If there's anything in your lease that you don't understand, just ask.
It's about being in the know, knowing what you're agreeing to. So we've got budgeting, emergency savings, talking to your landlord and understanding that lease. What else can people do long-term to make sure they have a stable place to live?
Think about having more than one source of income. If something happens and you lose one job, you've got something else to fall back on. And maybe look into getting some more skills or training so you can earn more.
So you're building that security in your finances and in your work life. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave everyone with this thought. Going through an eviction is tough, but it can also be a chance to make some positive changes in your life.
It can be a chance to rethink what's important, to build better money habits, and to stand up for yourself. And remember, you're not alone in this. There's help out there to get through these tough times and build a more stable future.
And don't forget to check out the show notes. We've got links to all the resources we've talked about and some extra stuff that we didn't have time for today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Stay curious, keep learning, and keep working toward that life that you want and deserve. We'll see you next time.
Call now 714-442-9741. Thank you.